Hey guys, tonight we are going on a journey, a long, dusty march with a Roman soldier. Imagine it. You are one of them, boots scuffing the earth, the sun beating down, a rhythmic groan from thousands of marching feet. You have a heavy pack on your back, the smell of sweat and leather is thick in the air, and your stomach is rumbling a little. This isn't a romantic stroll in the park with a picnic basket. Oh no, this is a survival challenge, and frankly, you probably won't survive this without understanding how to fuel yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey as a Roman soldier begins not with a hearty breakfast, but with a practical calculation of what you can carry versus what you will need to survive. You are not some pampered noble feasting on roasted boar. Your diet is a testament to efficiency, to the raw necessity of keeping a massive fighting force on the move. Your basic ration, the very bedrock of your existence on the march, is grain. And not just any grain, but an unglamorous, sometimes gritty, portion of wheat. This wheat is the lifeblood of the legion, the fuel that powers every wary step, every swing of your gladius. It is issued to you unground, a fact that might surprise you given our modern convenience of flour. But grinding it yourself, or at least being part of a collective effort to do so, is a fundamental part of your daily routine. Think of it as ancient meal prep, but with significantly more manual labor and a lot less avocado toast. You are issued about 2 pounds of wheat per day. That is a substantial amount, almost a kilogram. Try carrying a 2-pound bag of flour around for a few days, and you will quickly appreciate the weight, especially when it is part of a larger, heavier pack. This wheat is your caloric backbone, providing the sustained energy you need for forced marches that could cover 20 miles or more in a day, often under a blistering sun or through chilling rain. It is a slow-release fuel, the kind that keeps you going without the sudden sugar crashes of modern snacks. Historians still argue whether the daily 2-pound ration was always strictly adhered to, or if it varied based on supply lines and the intensity of the campaign. Some scholars suggest that in lean times, it might have been reduced, forcing soldiers to supplement their diet in other ways, a less than ideal situation when you are trying to conquer the world. But this wheat is not just eaten raw, of course. That would be quite a digestive challenge. It needs to be processed. This is where your ingenuity and the collective effort of your contubernium, a group of 8 soldiers who share a tent, comes into play. You might have a small hand mill, a quern stone, within your tent group, or you might share larger ones at the camp. The grinding is a repetitive, almost meditative task, the rhythmic scrape of stone against grain, turning hard kernels into a coarse flour. This flour then becomes the base for your bread, or rather, your hardtack. Imagine a flat, unleavened biscuit, baked directly on hot stones or in a makeshift oven. It is not gourmet by any stretch of the imagination. It is dense, chewy, and often quite dry. It is designed for longevity, for portability, and for providing maximum calories in a compact form. This is not the fluffy artisanal bread you pick up from your local bakery on a Sunday morning. This is sustenance, pure and simple, and it is surprisingly durable, able to withstand the rigors of travel without spoiling quickly. You might be chewing on a piece of this hardtack that is days old, perhaps even weeks, and still drawing sustenance from it. The texture would be, shall we say, rustic. Your teeth get a workout. Forget about a soft croissant. This is the original jawbreaker. One quirky tidbit is that some Roman soldiers would even use their shields as makeshift baking surfaces, flipping them over and building a small fire underneath, turning a tool of war into a kitchen utensil. Necessity, truly, is the mother of invention, especially when you are thousands of miles from home and hungry. So, the wheat is the foundation, but even a Roman soldier cannot live on hardtack alone. You also receive a ration of posca. What is posca, you ask? Think of it as the original sports drink, but with a distinctly Roman twist. It is a mixture of water and sour wine or vinegar. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, remember that access to clean drinking water on the march was a constant challenge. Stagnant water could carry diseases that would decimate a legion faster than any barbarian horde. So, the addition of vinegar or sour wine served a crucial purpose. The acidity helped to purify the water, making it safer to drink, and also masked the taste of less than pristine sources. It is also believed to have offered some minor antiseptic properties. It is not refreshing in the way a cold soda might be, but it is hydrating and functional. It is a practical solution to a pervasive problem. Imagine taking a swig of something that tastes like diluted pickle juice, and you are pretty close to the Roman experience. But after a long day of marching, when your throat is dry and your body is aching, even Posca would be a welcome relief. It is not about enjoyment, it is about survival. This is a far cry from the array of flavored waters and energy drinks available today. You do not have electrolytes from a brightly colored plastic bottle. You have Posca, and you are grateful for it. Some historians debate the precise ratio of water to wine or vinegar in Posca, suggesting it might have varied based on the availability of supplies and the preferences of individual legions, or even centuries. Was it a strong, bracing concoction, or a more dilute, barely flavored water? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, adapting to the circumstances of the moment. And while it might sound unappetizing to our modern palates, it was a vital component of the Roman soldiers' daily intake, ensuring hydration and mitigating the risks of waterborne illnesses. It is a testament to the Romans' pragmatic approach to logistics and the well-being of their fighting force. Even if that well-being tasted a bit like a vinegar salad dressing, you are not on a spare retreat after all. You are a Roman soldier and every sip counts. This is your life on the road. Beyond the foundational wheat and the ever-present Posca, your diet on the march also included a crucial source of protein: pork fat. This was not a gourmet cut, mind you, but rendered fat, often salted or smoked for preservation. It was a dense packet of calories, essential for providing the energy needed to endure long marches and strenuous physical labor. Think of it as the ancient world's energy bar, but a lot greasier and less appealing to look at. You would receive a regular, though not daily, ration of this fat. It was prized for its high caloric density, which is exactly what you need when you are burning thousands of calories just to put one foot in front of the other. Fat is your friend in a caloric deficit, and on campaign, you are almost always in a caloric deficit. This fat could be melted and mixed with your coarse flour to make a more palatable gruel or porridge, adding flavor and a much-needed boost of energy. Or you might simply eat it straight, a spoonful of solidified fat, a quick hit of fuel when you are truly desperate. It sounds unappetizing, I know, but imagine yourself after 20 miles, your muscles screaming, your stomach hollow. That lump of fat starts to look pretty good. It is all about efficiency. A small amount of fat provides a huge amount of energy, and it is relatively easy to transport and store compared to fresh meat. This was not a diet for the faint of heart or those seeking culinary delights. This was a diet of function, designed to keep a powerful war machine moving. Historians still argue whether the quality of this pork fat varied significantly between different legions or campaigns. Did some legions receive a higher grade of rendered fat, or was it a universally utilitarian product, scraped from whatever pig was available and slaughtered? The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle, influenced by supply lines and local availability. In addition to the pork fat, and sometimes as a substitute, you might also receive cured meats like bacon or dried beef. Again, the emphasis was on preservation and caloric density. Fresh meat was a luxury, rarely available unless you were fortunate enough to be near a source of supply or had successfully foraged or hunted something. Cured meats, however, could be transported for long periods without spoiling, making them ideal for the mobile army. Imagine a piece of dried, salty bacon, perhaps gnawed on like jerky, providing that much-needed protein and fat. It is a far cry from a sizzling steak, but it delivers the essential nutrients. These cured meats were often heavily salted, another technique for preservation, which meant you would be constantly thirsty, making that Posca even more essential. Think about the salt content in modern jerky, and then imagine a much more intense version, designed for survival, not snacking. You are not worried about your sodium intake on the march. You are worried about not collapsing from exhaustion. One mainstream historical fact is that the Romans were masters of logistics, and their ability to supply their armies on the move, even with relatively basic provisions, was a key factor in their military success. They understood that a well-fed army was a fighting army. You cannot conquer an empire if your soldiers are too weak to lift their swords. Vegetables, when available, were a welcome addition, but they were not a guaranteed part of your daily ration. You might come across pulses like lentils or beans, which are excellent sources of protein and fiber. These could be cooked into stews or porridges, adding a bit of variety and extra nutrition to your monotonous diet. Imagine a thick, earthy lentil stew, flavored with whatever herbs you could find along the way. It would be a hearty, warming meal, a brief respite from the blandness of hardtack and fat. Onions and garlic were also common, not just for flavor, but for their perceived medicinal properties. They were thought to ward off illness, a crucial consideration in a time before modern medicine. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Roman soldiers sometimes cultivated small gardens around their temporary camps during longer encampments, growing simple vegetables like lettuce and radishes to supplement their rations. This shows a remarkable foresight and a desire to improve their diet, even when on campaign. It is a testament to their resilience and their understanding of the importance of fresh produce, even in a world without refrigerators. These small gardens would have been a rare luxury, a brief taste of home in the midst of endless marching and warfare. However, the reality of a Roman soldier's diet on the march was often one of scarcity and monotony. You ate what you were given, and you were grateful for it. Fresh fruits were almost unheard of, unless you happened upon an orchard during a stop, a rare and fleeting delight. Water was a constant concern, and the purification of posca was a matter of life and death. The diet was functional, not flavorful. It was designed to provide the bare minimum necessary to keep you alive and fighting. It was a diet of necessity, not choice. You probably dreamed of the lavish feast you had heard about back in Rome, but those were for the senators and emperors. Not for you, the foot soldier slogging through the dust. Your luxury was a full belly, even if that belly was full of dry bread and rendered fat. This Spartan existence honed your physical resilience, making you a hardened veteran, capable of enduring immense hardship. You learned to appreciate every calorie, every drop of clean water. It was a diet that forged the legions, building a fighting force that was both physically tough and mentally resolute. And it was a diet that truly made you understand the meaning of survival. The focus was always on utility, on what would keep the engine running, not on culinary experimentation. So, while you might fantasize about a juicy roasted chicken, your reality was far more grounded in the practicalities of war. So you have your wheat, your posca, and your pork fat or cured meats. This forms the unshakable foundation of your marching diet. But what about salt? Salt was not just a seasoning, it was a critical component of your diet, especially given the amount of sweating you would do on those long, grueling marches. It was also a vital preservative for your rations. You would receive a ration of salt, usually in solid form, and it was considered extremely valuable. In fact, the word salary comes from the Latin salarium, which was a payment to Roman soldiers that sometimes included an allowance for salt. So, you literally earned your salt. This was not a light-hearted joke. It was a fundamental truth of your existence. Without adequate salt, your body would struggle to function. Dehydration would set in faster, and muscle cramps, fatigue, and even more serious conditions could become debilitating. Imagine the discomfort, the sheer physical agony, of a salt deficiency while marching miles every day under a relentless sun. It is not something you would want to experience. The salt was likely consumed with your food, sprinkled over your hardtack or mixed into your gruel to make it more palatable, and to ensure you were replenishing the electrolytes lost through sweat. It also helped to preserve the already cured meats, adding another layer of longevity to your precious protein sources. Beyond the core rations, what else might you encounter on your culinary journey across the Roman Empire? Foraging was a significant, if unpredictable, supplement. As you marched through different territories, your legion might encounter wild edibles. This could range from wild berries and fruits, if you were incredibly lucky and in the right season, to edible roots and plants. Imagine the excitement, the brief flicker of joy, at discovering a bush laden with ripe berries after weeks of nothing but dry bread. It would be a truly rare treat, a burst of fresh flavor that would momentarily transport you away from the monotony of your standard rations. However, foraging was not without its risks. Not all plants are edible, and some are downright poisonous. You would need to rely on the knowledge of local guides, or the more experienced veterans in your contubernium, who might have learned what was safe to eat through years of campaigning. One mainstream historical fact is that Roman soldiers were often highly skilled at improvisation and adapting to local conditions, and foraging was a natural extension of this adaptability. They were not just fighting machines, they were incredibly resourceful individuals. Another potential supplement, though often reserved for officers or gained through individual effort, was the acquisition of fresh meat. This could happen in several ways. Occasionally, if you were encamped near a village or town, provisions might be requisitioned or purchased, though this was often done at the army level, not individually. More often, it would involve hunting or fishing, if conditions permitted. Imagine setting traps for small game, or perhaps, if a river was nearby, trying to catch fish. This would require time and effort, resources that were often in short supply on a forced march. But the reward, a piece of fresh meat, would be invaluable. The protein and nutrients from fresh meat would be a massive boost to your energy and morale. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman military camps had rudimentary vivaria, or enclosures for keeping live animals like sheep or goats, to provide fresh meat for the officers, and sometimes for the regular soldiers on special occasions. This highlights the Roman desire for fresh food, even in the most challenging environments, and the lengths they would go to ensure their officers were well fed, which in turn kept them performing at their peak. Historians still argue whether the Roman army actively encouraged individual foraging and hunting, or if it was merely tolerated as a necessary evil to supplement rations. Some scholars believe that too much individual foraging could lead to disciplinary issues and a breaking of ranks, while others suggest it was an integral part of the soldier's self-sufficiency. The truth is likely a nuanced blend, with official policy sometimes differing from the practical realities on the ground. A strict commander might discourage it, while a more lenient one might turn a blind eye, especially if supplies were running low. You are a soldier, and discipline is paramount, but a hungry soldier is an ineffective soldier, so a balance had to be struck. Your cooking setup on the march was minimal. You would carry a small cooking pot, perhaps made of bronze or iron, which would be shared among your contubernium. This pot would be used to boil water for posca, to cook pulses, or to make a gruel from your wheat flour and fat. Firewood would be collected along the way, a constant chore but a necessary one. Imagine gathering sticks and branches, after a long day of marching, your muscles aching, knowing that without a fire, your meager meal would be even less appealing. The smell of wood smoke would be a constant companion in the evening, a sign that a meal was being prepared, however humble. This communal aspect of cooking fostered camaraderie within your contubernium. You were dependent on each other, not just in battle, but in the most basic act of survival, feeding yourselves. There is a sense of shared hardship, a bond forged over bland food and smoky fires. It is a simple life, stripped down to its essentials, and your diet is a reflection of that simplicity. No fancy kitchen gadgets, no elaborate recipes, just basic ingredients, a fire, and the collective effort of a few tired but determined men. This is the Roman military culinary experience, raw and unadorned. The consumption of oil was another significant aspect of your Roman soldier's diet on the march. While not a daily staple in the same quantity as wheat or posca, olive oil was a valuable commodity that provided essential fats and calories. It was often issued in smaller quantities, perhaps a modest flask that would need to be carefully rationed. Think of it as a concentrated energy source, a liquid gold that could enhance the palatability of your otherwise bland meals. Olive oil could be drizzled over your hardtack to soften it slightly and add flavor, or mixed into your gruel to make it richer and more satisfying. It also served as a source of healthy fats, crucial for sustained energy and overall well-being, especially when you are expending so much energy daily. It was not just for cooking, either. Olive oil also served as a lubricant for equipment, a cleaning agent, and even a basic form of medicine for wounds or skin ailments. It was truly a multi-purpose essential for the Roman soldier. You would guard your small flask of oil carefully, knowing its value extended far beyond mere culinary use. It was a resource, and every drop counted. Historians still argue whether olive oil was a regular, standardized ration for all soldiers, or if its availability varied significantly based on the region of deployment and the length of the campaign. Some scholars suggest that in areas where olive trees were scarce, other animal fats or even nuts might have served a similar purpose as a fat supplement. Speaking of nuts, while not a standard ration, nuts and dried fruits could occasionally supplement your diet, particularly if you were campaigning in regions where they were abundant. Imagine coming across a small stash of walnuts or dried figs. These would be a delightful change from the usual fare, offering a burst of natural sweetness and additional nutrients. They are also relatively easy to carry and provide concentrated energy. However, these would be opportunistic finds, not something you could rely on. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman soldiers, particularly those from wealthier backgrounds, before their enlistment, might have occasionally received care packages from home containing dried fruits or more exotic spices, a rare and cherished luxury that would have been shared sparingly, if at all, with their contubernium. These small comforts would have been a poignant reminder of the life they left behind, a brief taste of home in the harsh reality of military life. The concept of a balanced diet, as we understand it today, was, of course, entirely alien to the Roman soldier. Their diet was dictated by logistics, preservation, and caloric efficiency. Variety was a luxury, and fresh produce was a fleeting dream. Yet, the Roman military machine was remarkably effective, suggesting that their basic diet, while monotonous, was sufficient to maintain a physically robust fighting force. Your body adapted to this Spartan regimen. You became accustomed to the taste of coarse bread and the texture of rendered fat. Your palate simplified, and your appreciation for simple sustenance grew. You learned to extract every calorie, every nutrient from what was available. It was a diet that bred resilience, not gourmands. One mainstream historical fact is that the Roman army's success was not just due to superior tactics or weaponry, but also to its unparalleled logistical capabilities, including the effective provisioning of its troops over vast distances and varied terrains. This ability to feed an army, even with a basic diet, was a strategic advantage. The preparation of your meals was often a communal affair, particularly in the evening when the legion settled into camp. While you might grind your own wheat, the cooking of the gruel or the baking of the hardtack would likely be a shared responsibility within your contubernium. Imagine the small fires flickering across the vast expanse of the Roman camp, the murmur of voices, the occasional clatter of a cooking pot. It is a tableau of shared hardship and camaraderie. The smell of wood smoke, mingled with the faint aroma of cooking grain, would hang heavy in the air. This communal cooking not only made the process more efficient, but also strengthened the bonds between soldiers. You relied on each other, sharing the labor and the meager rewards. It was a small slice of human connection in an otherwise brutal existence. There was no room for individual eccentricities in cooking. Efficiency and consistency were key. Everyone ate roughly the same thing, prepared in roughly the same way. This uniformity also contributed to the overall discipline and cohesion of the legion. You are all in this together, sharing the same food, the same struggles. The psychological impact of such a monotonous diet should not be underestimated. Imagine eating essentially the same few items, day in and day out, for months on end. It would test your mental fortitude as much as your physical endurance. You would probably dream of roasted meats and sweet pastries. You would savor every meager addition to your diet, every accidental berry or fortunate fish. These small moments of variation would become significant milestones, breaking the endless cycle of coarse bread and posca. The anticipation of a meal, however simple, would be a driving force at the end of a long day. It is a primal instinct, the need to refuel, and for the Roman soldier, it was fulfilled with brutal efficiency. There were no emotional eating binges, no comfort food in the modern sense. Food was fuel, plain and simple, and you learned to accept that truth, even if your taste buds occasionally yearned for something more. This rigorous simplicity, however, contributed to the Roman soldiers' legendary discipline and resilience, making them arguably the most formidable fighting force of their time. Water, or rather the secure and safe provision of it, was perhaps the most critical logistical challenge for the Roman army on the march, far more so than even food. While posca helped, the underlying source of water needed to be reliable. You, as a Roman soldier, would be acutely aware of every stream, every well, every potential source of hydration along your route. Thirst was a constant companion, a nagging sensation that often overshadowed hunger. Dehydration could incapacitate a soldier far more quickly than starvation, leading to heat stroke, muscle cramps, and cognitive impairment, making you useless in battle and a burden to your comrades. So, the engineers and scouts would be constantly assessing water sources, testing them, and often building temporary channels or even small aqueducts to bring water to a larger camp. This was not just about quenching thirst, it was about preventing disease. Stagnant water, as you well know, was a breeding ground for sickness, and a legion struck down by dysentery was a legion rendered impotent. The Romans were incredibly advanced in their understanding of hygiene for their time, and the purity of their water supply was paramount. You might carry a small personal water skin, made of leather, which would often be filled with posca, rather than plain water for the added protection. This skin would be your most cherished possession, a constant reminder of your fundamental need for hydration. Historians still argue whether the Roman army routinely boiled all water for their soldiers, or if the addition of vinegar in posca was considered sufficient purification in most circumstances. The reality likely varied depending on the water source and the perceived risk. The act of obtaining water was often a communal effort, a task shared by your contubernum or century. Imagine arriving at a new camp after a grueling march, dusty and parched, and the first order of business being to fetch water. It could mean a long trek to a distant well, or waiting in line at a riverbank, guarding against potential ambushes. This seemingly mundane task was fraught with danger and required discipline. Sentries would be posted, and the process would be organized to ensure efficiency and safety. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman camps would even have specialized units whose sole purpose was to find, test, and secure water sources for the legion, using rudimentary tools like dowsing rods or observing animal behavior to identify potential underground springs. This highlights the extreme importance placed on water provision. Beyond the daily rations and water, there was the element of supplementary food obtained through plunder or requisition. While officially forbidden or strictly controlled, the reality on campaign was often different. As your legion marched through conquered or enemy territory, resources would be taken. This could mean livestock, grain from farms, or supplies from villages. While some of this would go into the general army stores, a portion might inevitably find its way into the hands of individual soldiers. Imagine the thrill of finding a few chickens or a sack of fresh vegetables in a deserted farm. It would be a momentary feast, a welcome departure from the monotony. However, relying on plunder was unpredictable and could lead to disciplinary issues if not managed properly. One mainstream historical fact is that the practice of living off the land was a double-edged sword for Roman commanders. While it could alleviate supply strain, it also risked alienating local populations and could lead to soldiers breaking ranks, jeopardizing military cohesion. The diet was also influenced by the region in which you were campaigning. If you were in Gaul, you might encounter different types of grain or local produce than if you were in Egypt or Britannia. The Romans were pragmatic, and they would utilize local resources when possible, adapting their logistics to the available foodstuffs. This meant that while the core ration of wheat remained constant, the supplementary items could vary considerably. Imagine the subtle differences in the taste of your hardtack depending on the local wheat, or the occasional treat of regional cheeses or fruits that might be acquired. These variations, however small, would have been significant to your palate, accustomed as it was to uniformity. The Roman army also had a system of provision trains, long columns of wagons laden with supplies that followed the legions. These trains carried not only extra rations of grain, salt, and cured meats, but also vital equipment, tools, and materials. This was a massive logistical undertaking, requiring an immense amount of planning and coordination. The security of these supply lines was paramount, as a successful attack on a provision train could cripple a legion. You would often be tasked with guarding these trains, a duty that, while seemingly less glamorous than frontline combat, was equally vital to the survival of the army. Imagine the sheer scale of it: hundreds of wagons, thousands of animals, all moving slowly across the landscape, a lifeline stretching back to the heart of the empire. This reliance on supply lines meant that the Roman army, despite its self-sufficiency on a daily basis, was ultimately tethered to its logistical infrastructure. A strong, secure supply chain meant a well-fed army. A disrupted one meant hardship, hunger, and potentially defeat. So, while you might be incredibly resourceful, you were still part of a vast, interconnected system, and your diet was a direct consequence of its efficiency or lack thereof. You learned to appreciate the unseen work that kept you fed and hydrated, the logistics that truly made the Roman Empire function. Your daily routine on the march, as a Roman soldier, revolved heavily around your diet and the preparation of your food. Forget leisurely breakfasts and gourmet dinners. Your mornings would likely begin with a quick, perhaps even cold, meal of hardtack or a small portion of gruel. There would be little time for elaborate cooking. The legion would be on the move early, often before dawn, to maximize the distance covered during the cooler parts of the day. So, your first meal would be more about quick fuel than enjoyment. Imagine gnawing on a piece of tough, dry bread, perhaps washed down with a gulp of posca, all while packing up your gear. and preparing for another day of relentless marching. It was not a culinary experience. It was simply a necessity to get energy into your system before the grueling day began. This quick start allowed the Legion to maintain its legendary marching pace, a pace that often outmaneuvered enemy forces. Efficiency was key, and that extended to every aspect of your morning. You would become adept at eating on the go, or at least quickly before the call to march. Throughout the day, as you trudged along, there would be no designated lunch break in the modern sense. Instead, you would likely carry some of your hardtack, and possibly a small portion of dried meat or cheese in your personal pack, to be consumed on the move or during short, informal halts. Think of it as ancient power snacks, eaten while still burdened with your heavy equipment. You would snatch a few bites whenever the opportunity arose, whenever the column paused for a few minutes, or even while walking, if you could manage it. This constant, albeit small, intake of calories helped to sustain your energy levels over the long distances. It was a disciplined approach to fueling, designed to keep you from crashing mid-march. There was no communal campfire lunch, no sit-down meal. It was about individual sustenance, silently consumed. One mainstream historical fact is that Roman soldiers were renowned for their incredible marching endurance, often covering 20-30 miles a day, a feat that would be challenging even for modern, well-equipped armies. This endurance was directly linked to their disciplined approach to diet and hydration. When the Legion finally made camp in the evening, this is when the most substantial meal of your day would take place. After the defensive ditch was dug, the rampart built, and the tents pitched, your attention would turn to cooking. This was the time for your contubernium to pool its resources, to light a fire, and to prepare a hot meal. This would likely be a gruel or porridge made from your wheat flour, perhaps with some pork fat or cured meat mixed in, and any foraged vegetables or pulses that might have been acquired. Imagine the comforting warmth of a hot meal after a long day of physical exertion, the steam rising from the communal pot. It would be a simple but satisfying repast, providing much-needed replenishment for your weary body. This evening meal was not just about calories, it was also a moment of camaraderie, a chance to relax slightly, to share stories, and to reinforce the bonds within your small tent group. It was the closest thing you had to a proper dining experience on the march. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Roman soldiers, especially those from more humble origins, might have often shared their meals with their pets, particularly dogs, who were sometimes kept as companions and even guards in the camps. This personal connection, however small, would have been a comforting presence in an otherwise harsh environment. Historians still argue whether the evening meal was always hot, or if circumstances sometimes forced soldiers to consume cold rations even in camp. Factors like sudden enemy threats, lack of firewood, or extreme weather conditions could certainly impact the ability to light fires and cook. While the ideal was a hot meal, practicality often dictated otherwise. You learned to adapt, to be content with whatever fuel you could get, hot or cold. The focus was always on survival and readiness. You are a soldier first, a diner second. Beyond the primary food sources, what about stimulants or other minor indulgences? Alcohol, specifically wine, was a common beverage in the Roman world, but on the march, it was strictly controlled and often reserved for posca. Pure wine was a luxury, rarely available to the common soldier, unless it was part of a celebratory occasion or a victory feast, which were few and far between on campaign. You might occasionally receive a small ration of undiluted wine as a morale booster, but it would be a rare treat, to be savored. Think of it as a celebratory drink, not a daily indulgence. Tobacco, of course, was unknown in the ancient world, so no cigarette breaks for you. The closest thing to a stimulant might have been the bitter taste of posca, or the sheer adrenaline of combat. Your resilience came from within, from your training and your physical conditioning, not from external pick-me-ups. The concept of dietary supplements or vitamins was, needless to say, completely absent. You relied on the raw ingredients, on the natural nutrients present in your wheat, meat, and occasional vegetables. Scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, was a potential threat on long campaigns, especially if fresh produce was consistently unavailable. However, the use of vinegar in posca, and the occasional foraging for wild plants, likely provided some limited protection against such deficiencies. The human body is remarkably adaptable, and yours, as a Roman soldier, would be pushed to its limits and beyond. You would learn to thrive on a diet that modern nutritionists would likely deem insufficient. but it was a diet forged in the crucible of military necessity, designed to sustain an empire on the move. And it worked. The sheer longevity and effectiveness of the Roman legions are a testament to the fact that, however basic, their diet was fundamentally sound for its purpose. You might not have been enjoying every meal, but you were well fed enough to conquer nations. When we talk about what a Roman soldier ate, it is easy to forget that the source of these provisions varied greatly depending on where the legion was stationed, and whether it was on active campaign or in a more settled garrison. On a march, the emphasis was heavily on non-perishable, easily transportable staples. But imagine a scenario where your legion is static for a longer period, perhaps building a frontier fort or occupying a newly conquered territory. In such instances, your diet would see a significant, if still utilitarian, upgrade. Fresh produce, for example, would become more accessible. Local farmers, if amenable or coerced, would supply the garrison with vegetables like cabbage, carrots, turnips, and onions. These would be a welcome relief from the monotony of dried rations, providing essential vitamins and minerals that were often scarce on the march. Imagine the vibrant colors and fresh scents of a farmer's market, albeit a Roman military version, as fresh greens are brought into camp. This direct access to fresh food greatly improved the overall health and morale of the soldiers. Historians still argue whether garrisons maintained their own farms or relied exclusively on local procurement. It was likely a combination, with larger, more permanent forts sometimes having dedicated agricultural plots worked by auxiliary troops or even slaves. Meat, too, would become more varied and frequent. Instead of just cured pork fat, you might see fresh beef, lamb, or poultry. Livestock could be kept within or near the camp, providing a steady supply of protein. Imagine the crackling of a roasting joint over an open fire, a smell that would be a rare treat on the march. This fresh meat would be a massive morale booster, offering not just sustenance, but also a sense of normalcy and comfort. The ability to cook and consume fresh meat regularly also meant a greater intake of fats and proteins, essential for recovery from rigorous training and labor. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman garrisons along the Rhine frontier were known to consume large quantities of wild game, particularly boar and deer, hunted in the surrounding forests, supplementing their diet with a taste of the wild. This would have required skilled hunters among the ranks, and likely provided a more varied and exciting protein source than the standard fare. Bread, while still the staple, would likely be of a better quality in a garrison. You would have access to more consistent milling, potentially finer flour, and proper ovens. This would result in a more palatable, perhaps even somewhat leavened loaf, a far cry from the hardtack of the road. Imagine the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the permanent camp, a comforting aroma of settled life. This improvement in bread quality, however subtle, would have been highly appreciated. It speaks to the Roman understanding that while soldiers needed to be tough, a certain level of comfort, even in their diet, could contribute to discipline and contentment. One mainstream historical fact is that permanent Roman military camps, or castra, often grew into significant settlements and even cities, attracting traders, artisans, and farmers, largely due to the stable demand for goods and services, including food, created by the presence of a large military force. The daily routine in a garrison would allow for more structured meal times, providing a sense of routine and stability. You would likely have designated mess areas, even if rudimentary, where soldiers would gather to eat. This communal dining further reinforced the bonds of camaraderie within the legion. It was not just about eating, it was about shared experience, storytelling, and a brief respite from the rigors of military life. Imagine the hum of conversation, the clatter of bowls, the sound of laughter in the mess hall, a stark contrast to the silent, hurried eating on the march. Wine, too, would be more readily available in a garrison. While still not consumed to excess, a daily ration of undiluted wine might be granted, or it could be purchased from local vendors who set up shop outside the camp gates. This would be a welcome addition to your evening meal, a small luxury to unwind after a day of training or duties. The wine would likely be diluted with water, even if not strictly required for purification, as was the Roman custom. It was about enjoyment and social lubrication, not intoxication. This shift to more varied and fresh food sources highlights the adaptable nature of the Roman military diet. It was not static, it evolved with the circumstances, always prioritizing the well-being and effectiveness of the soldiers within the constraints of logistics and available resources. So, While the marching diet was a stark lesson in endurance and survival, the garrison diet offered a glimpse of a more stable, albeit still disciplined, existence. It was a reminder that even for a Roman soldier, there were subtle differences in what you ate depending on whether you were conquering or holding ground. Let's delve a bit deeper into the logistics of food transport, an unsung hero of the Roman military machine. Imagine being a Roman soldier on the march, your life dependent on the steady flow of supplies. The sheer scale of moving provisions for tens of thousands of men, plus their auxiliary troops, horses, and baggage animals, across vast and often hostile territories, is truly staggering. Food was not just a matter of sustenance, it was a strategic weapon. A well-supplied army could sustain a siege, endure long campaigns, and maintain morale. A poorly supplied one would quickly disintegrate, plagued by hunger, disease, and desertion. Your food did not magically appear. It was part of an intricate, highly organized system. The Roman army utilized a network of supply depots, granaries, and fortified way stations along their major routes. These were essentially ancient logistics hubs, stocked with preserved food and other essentials. Imagine the colossal granaries, filled to the brim with sacks of wheat, salt, and cured meats, waiting to be dispatched to a marching legion. This centralized storage was crucial for ensuring a continuous supply chain. The primary method of transport was by wagon. Long columns of ox-drawn or mule-drawn wagons, often numbering in the hundreds, would follow the legions, laden with sacks of grain, barrels of posca, and bundles of preserved meats. These wagons were slow, cumbersome, and vulnerable, making their protection a constant concern. You, as a soldier, might often be assigned to guard duty for these provision trains, a critical task that ensured your next meal arrived safely. It was a tedious job, walking alongside slow-moving wagons, but you understood its importance. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman military engineers even designed specialized, more robust wagons for traversing rough terrain, showcasing their dedication to overcoming logistical challenges. These specialized vehicles would have been a significant asset in maintaining the flow of supplies over difficult landscapes. Rivers and seas were also extensively used for transport whenever possible. Large quantities of grain and other heavy goods could be moved far more efficiently by boat than by land. The Romans built impressive port facilities and river networks to facilitate this. Imagine barges laden with supplies gliding down the Tiber or along the coasts. A stark contrast to the laborious overland journey. This naval logistics allowed for the rapid deployment of provisions to distant campaigns, often cutting down travel times and reducing the risk of overland ambushes. Historians still argue whether the Roman Navy's primary role was military or logistical. While it certainly engaged in naval warfare, its critical function in securing sea lanes and transporting goods for the army cannot be overstated. Beyond the official supply chains, local procurement played a significant role, though often unsystematically. As your legion moved through an area, the local population would be expected to provide provisions, sometimes willingly through trade, more often through requisition or forced contribution. This practice, while beneficial to the Roman army, often led to resentment and hardship among the civilian population. Imagine a village elder pleading with a Roman centurion to leave them enough grain for the winter, knowing that refusal could mean starvation. It was a harsh reality of Roman military occupation. However, this system allowed the army to reduce the burden on its own supply lines, especially in rich agricultural regions. One mainstream historical fact is that the Roman system of contributions or indictions often led to significant economic disruption and hardship for conquered populations, as they were forced to support the occupying army with their resources. The soldiers themselves also carried a significant portion of their own rations, especially the immediate daily needs. Your heavy pack, or sarcina, contained not only your personal equipment, but also several days' worth of wheat, hardtack, and other immediate provisions. This self-sufficiency reduced the immediate burden on the supply train and allowed for greater mobility for short periods. Imagine the weight on your shoulders, knowing that every pound you carried was a day of survival. This personal carrying capacity was a defining characteristic of the Roman legionary and contributed significantly to their rapid marching capabilities. The idea was that a Roman soldier should be able to operate independently for a few days if cut off from the main supply. The constant need for resupply meant that the Roman army was never truly static. Even in garrison, there was a continuous flow of goods coming in and out. The logistics of feeding the legions were a testament to Roman organizational prowess. A complex dance of supply and demand played out across an entire empire. Every sack of grain, every barrel of posca, was a link in a chain that stretched from the granaries of Egypt to the frontiers of Britannia. And your ability to fight, to conquer, to endure, was directly tied to the efficiency of this unseen logistical network. It was a system that, for its time, was unparalleled, a true marvel of ancient engineering and administration, all designed to keep you, the Roman soldier, well fed enough to continue your relentless march towards victory. The entire machine depended on your stomach being adequately, if not delightfully, full. Let us talk about the concept of marching rations versus campaign rations, a subtle but significant distinction in your life as a Roman soldier. When we speak of marching rations, we are typically referring to the absolute essentials you would carry on your person for immediate consumption during a rapid advance or a daily trek. This is the unground wheat, the hardtack, the preserved fat, the personal water skin filled with posca. These are designed for maximum portability and caloric density, allowing you to move quickly without being overly reliant on cumbersome supply wagons. The focus here is on efficiency and survival, on getting you from point A to point B with your fighting strength intact. Imagine the minimalist approach, stripped down to the bare necessities, every ounce counting. This is the diet of pure function, fuel for the relentless advance. One mainstream historical fact is that Roman soldiers were expected to carry their own heavy packs, often weighing 60-80 pounds, which included tools, personal belongings, and several days' worth of marching rations, contributing to their formidable endurance. Campaign rations, on the other hand, encompass the broader spectrum of provisions available to the army once a more settled camp is established, or during periods of less rapid movement. This is when the supply wagons catch up, when local procurement becomes more feasible, and when some level of cooking and communal eating can occur. This is when you might see the introduction of pulses like lentils and beans, which require soaking and cooking. This is when fresh meat might be available from local sources or through hunting, and when better quality bread, perhaps even slightly leavened, could be baked in temporary ovens. Campaign rations offer a degree of variety and nutritional balance that marching rations simply cannot. Imagine the relief of settling into a more permanent camp, knowing that a hot, more substantial meal is on the horizon. This shift from marching to campaign rations reflects the changing logistical needs and opportunities of the army. Historians still argue whether the transition between these two types of rations was always smooth and predictable, or if it was often a chaotic improvisation based on the ever-changing realities of warfare and supply disruptions. The ideal was a smooth transition, but the reality was likely far more fluid. The impact of diet on morale cannot be overstated. While your Roman discipline was legendary, even the toughest soldier could be demoralized by constant hunger and a monotonous diet. A hot meal, a piece of fresh meat, or even a handful of berries could provide a significant psychological boost, reminding you that you were still human, not just a cog in the military machine. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of a full belly after a long day, the simple pleasure of a warm drink as the sun sets. These small comforts were vital for maintaining fighting spirit. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman military commanders understood the importance of morale so well that they would occasionally order special distributions of wine or even small amounts of precious spices to their troops, particularly before a major battle, as a symbolic gesture of appreciation and to boost fighting spirit. These rare indulgences would have been remembered for a long time. The availability of different food types also speaks to the Roman military's adaptability. They did not rigidly adhere to a single dietary plan regardless of circumstances. Instead, they adapted to what was available locally and what could be logistically supported. This meant that a legion campaigning in a fertile agricultural region might have a slightly better and more varied diet than one slogging through a desolate, sparsely populated area. This pragmatism was a hallmark of Roman military thinking. They understood that a flexible approach to provisioning was essential for sustained success. You learned to be resilient, to make do with what you had, but also to appreciate any improvement in your daily fare. The storage of food also played a critical role. Grain, for instance, was often transported in sacks, but also in specialized containers or even in the form of pre-baked hardtack, which was less susceptible to spoilage. Cured meats were heavily salted or smoked to extend their shelf life, Olive oil and posca would be transported in amphorae or leather skins. Imagine the immense effort involved in packaging and preserving such vast quantities of food for months on end. Without refrigeration or modern preservation techniques, this required a deep understanding of natural preservation methods passed down through generations. One could say Roman soldiers were true connoisseurs of extended shelf life, not by choice, but by necessity. This careful management of food storage was just as important as its transport, ensuring that when you finally got your hands on your rations, they were still edible, however unappetizing. So, whether you were on a rapid march or settled in a temporary camp, your diet was a carefully calibrated equation of calories, logistics, and raw survival, designed to keep the greatest fighting force of its time moving forward, one tough bite at a time. And every soldier understood, on a primal level, that their very existence depended on the steady flow of that sustenance. The sheer energy expenditure of a Roman soldier on the march is something truly worth pausing to consider. You are not just walking, you are marching, often at a forced pace, carrying a heavy pack, wearing armor, and potentially building fortifications at the end of the day. Your daily caloric needs would have been immense, far exceeding those of a sedentary person today. We are talking thousands upon thousands of calories, estimated by some historians to be in the range of 4,000 to 6,000 calories per day, depending on the intensity of the campaign. This is why the staple of your diet, wheat, was so crucial. It provided a steady, sustained release of carbohydrates, the primary fuel for endurance activities. Imagine trying to run a marathon every day for weeks on end, while carrying a significant load and then adding some manual labor to the mix. That is a rough approximation of your daily caloric demands. And your diet, however basic, was designed to meet those demands, allowing you to sustain such an arduous pace. This was not a diet for weight loss. It was a diet for brute strength and endurance. Historians still argue about the precise caloric intake of Roman soldiers, with estimates varying based on interpretations of historical texts and comparisons to modern military nutrition. The importance of fats in your diet, particularly from pork fat and olive oil, becomes even clearer when considering these high energy demands. Fats are incredibly calorically dense, providing 9 calories per gram, compared to 4 calories per gram for carbohydrates and proteins. This meant that a small amount of fat could provide a significant energy boost. It was a compact, efficient fuel source that was relatively easy to transport and store. Imagine dipping your hardtack into melted pork fat, a simple act that would infuse your meal with a massive caloric punch. It might not have been delicious, but it was incredibly effective. This focus on dense energy sources highlights the pragmatic approach to military diet. It was not about taste, it was about fueling a high-performance human machine. One mainstream historical fact is that ancient armies, including the Romans, understood the fundamental link between caloric intake and sustained physical performance. Even if they lacked modern nutritional science, protein, while not as abundant as carbohydrates, was also vital for muscle repair and maintenance. Your sources were primarily cured meats, occasional fresh meat in garrisons, and pulses like lentils. While perhaps not hitting the protein macros of a modern bodybuilder, it was enough to maintain muscle mass and aid recovery from daily exertion. Remember, these were lean, fit men, their bodies honed by constant physical activity. They were not aiming for bulk, they were aiming for functional strength and endurance. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman medical texts suggest that military doctors would prescribe certain foods, like specific types of fish or stronger wines, to aid in the recovery of wounded soldiers, demonstrating a rudimentary understanding of the therapeutic properties of food. The Roman diet also speaks to the resilience of the human body and its ability to adapt to a limited range of food sources. Despite the lack of variety, your body found a way to extract the necessary nutrients and energy. You learned to live with a diet that might seem incredibly restrictive by modern standards, but it sustained one of the most effective fighting forces in history. Your digestive system became accustomed to coarse grains and tough meats. There were no gourmet allergies to contend with. You ate what you were given, or you went hungry. This enforced dietary simplicity inadvertently fostered a strong and resilient digestive system, capable of handling a wide range of less than ideal food sources. The psychological aspect of sustained hunger and monotony also played a role in shaping the Roman soldier's character. You learned patience, resilience, and a deep appreciation for even the smallest comforts. The prospect of a hot meal at the end of a grueling day, however basic, became a powerful motivator. It was a stark contrast to the modern world of abundant food choices, where we are often spoiled for options. For you, the Roman soldier, every meal was a reminder of your survival, a testament to the efforts of your legion and the logistical machine behind it. It was a profound connection to the very act of living, a raw, primal relationship with sustenance. This simplicity, this lack of choice, forged a certain kind of soldier, hardy, adaptable, and immensely disciplined. You learned to extract not just calories, but also satisfaction from the most basic of provisions. And in that satisfaction, you found the strength to continue your relentless march, day after day, year after year, building an empire one tough meal at a time. The Roman military understood that an army marches on its stomach, and they built a system to ensure that stomach was, however grudgingly, full. Let's not forget the role of civilian contractors and camp followers in the Roman military diet, especially during longer encampments or when legions were in established garrisons. While the army provided basic rations, a bustling economy often sprang up around military camps, offering soldiers additional food items, luxuries, and services that would never be found in their standard marching provisions. Imagine arriving at a large, semi-permanent camp and seeing a small market forming outside the gates. Here, civilian vendors, often following the army, would sell a variety of goods. This could include fresh produce like fruits and vegetables, often bought from local farmers. Perhaps apples, pears, or even grapes if you were in a suitable region and season. These fresh items would be a welcome burst of flavor and vitamins, a stark contrast to the dried or cured rations. While expensive, they were a coveted treat. Historians still argue about the extent to which soldiers' pay, or stipendium, was spent on such supplemental food items, or if the army actively encouraged these civilian markets as a way to boost morale and supplement soldier diets informally. Beyond fresh produce, these civilian markets might offer more processed foods or small indulgences. Think about prepared bread, perhaps less dense and more palatable than your standard hardtack, or even simple pastries sweetened with honey. Cheese, a common food in the Roman world, might also be available for purchase, offering another source of protein and fat. Imagine the pungent aroma of different cheeses, a luxury item compared to your usual fare. Wine, too, would be sold, often in larger quantities and of better quality than the sour wine used for Posca. This would be a chance for a soldier to enjoy a glass of undiluted wine, a rare pleasure to be savored after a long day of duties. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some civilian vendors would even set up rudimentary pop-up taverns or eateries, offering hot meals or roasted meats to soldiers who had a bit of spare cash, turning the camp periphery into a small, temporary urban center. These establishments would have been lively hubs of activity, a social outlet as much as a place to eat. These civilian provisions were not part of your official ration, so you would need to purchase them with your own pay. This created a dual economy within the army, the official provisioning system, and the informal market. The availability of these goods depended heavily on the wealth of the region, the length of the encampment, and your personal finances. A soldier with a little extra cash might indulge in these luxuries, while others would stick to their basic rations. This added a layer of economic hierarchy to the military experience. One mainstream historical fact is that the presence of large Roman military camps often stimulated local economies, creating demand for goods and services, and sometimes leading to the growth of civilian settlements that eventually became towns or cities. The presence of camp followers also meant the possibility of more varied cooking methods. While your contubernium relied on basic open fires and shared pots, civilian vendors might have small, portable ovens or griddles, allowing for a wider range of prepared foods. Imagine the enticing smell of roasting meat or freshly baked bread wafting from a civilian stall, a powerful temptation after weeks of hardtack. This informal economy helped to diversify the soldier's diet, even if only occasionally, and provided a crucial psychological outlet. It offered a taste of civilian life, a brief escape from the rigid discipline of the military. However, relying on these external sources had its drawbacks. Prices could be exorbitant, especially in remote areas or during times of scarcity. The quality of goods could be inconsistent, and there was always the risk of unscrupulous vendors. Furthermore, commanders often regulated the activities of camp followers to prevent disorder, excessive drinking, or the spread of disease. So, while these civilian provisions offered a welcome respite from the monotony, they were not a guaranteed part of your daily life. They were an opportunity, a chance to briefly improve your diet and indulge in a few comforts, but always dependent on circumstance and personal means. The disciplined Roman soldier understood that these were extras, not essentials. Your true sustenance still came from the marching rations, the unglamorous but utterly reliable foundation of your survival. You learn to appreciate the basics, but you also learn to seize any chance to add a little flavor, a little freshness, to your otherwise Spartan existence. Let's discuss the occasional supplements to your Roman soldier's diet that were not necessarily part of the standard rations, but could be acquired through skill, opportunity, or necessity. Hunting and fishing. While the Roman army had a highly organized supply chain, individual initiative to supplement one's diet was certainly present, particularly in regions where game was abundant or near bodies of water. Imagine you are encamped near a forest or a river, perhaps during a lull in campaigning. The idea of fresh meat, or even just a change of protein, would be incredibly enticing after weeks of cured pork fat. Hunting small game like rabbits, hares, or birds would be a possibility for soldiers with the necessary skills and equipment. This would not be a formal military operation, but rather an individual or small group endeavor during off-duty hours. You might set simple snares or traps, or perhaps if you were particularly adept with a sling or bow, attempt to bring down larger birds. The meat, though meager, would be a welcome addition to your evening meal, perhaps roasted over an open fire, filling the air with a tantalizing aroma. Historians still argue about the extent to which hunting by individual soldiers was officially permitted or merely tolerated, given the potential for soldiers to wander away from camp and compromise security. Fishing, if a river or lake was nearby, offered another potential source of fresh food. Simple nets, lines, or even rudimentary traps could be employed. Imagine the quiet patience required to sit by a river, hoping for a bite, a stark contrast to the chaos of battle. The fish, though small, would provide much-needed protein and variety. It would be cleaned and cooked over a fire, perhaps wrapped in leaves if available. The simplicity of these methods highlights the resourcefulness of the Roman soldier. You made do with what you had, and you adapted to the environment around you. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman legionaries, particularly those from coastal regions, might have carried small, personal fishing hooks and lines as part of their non-standard personal gear, reflecting their individual skills and desire to supplement their diet. This personal touch underscores the human element within the disciplined military machine. The acquisition of these supplementary foods through hunting or fishing would be entirely dependent on the specific environment and the availability of resources. You would not be guaranteed a successful hunt or catch every time. It was a matter of luck and skill. Furthermore, the time and effort invested in these activities had to be balanced against your military duties and the need for rest. A tired soldier is a liability, so you would need to be strategic about when and how you pursued these additional food sources. One mainstream historical fact is that the Romans were keen observers of their environment and would often exploit local resources, including flora and fauna, to support their military campaigns. This pragmatic approach extended to every aspect of their operations, including food. The cooking of these acquired meats or fish would typically be simple, focusing on direct heat over a fire. No elaborate sauces or seasonings were available. Perhaps a sprinkle of salt, if you had it, would be the only enhancement. The flavor would be dictated by the freshness of the catch and the basic cooking method. Imagine the simple satisfaction of eating something you had personally acquired, a small victory in the constant battle against monotony. This act of self-sufficiency, even in something as basic as finding food, reinforced your capabilities and your sense of independence, even within the highly structured military environment. The consumption of these wild resources also carried an inherent risk. Not all wild game is healthy, and improper cooking could lead to illness. However, the hunger of a marching soldier often outweighed these concerns. You learned to distinguish between edible and non-edible, safe and unsafe, relying on practical knowledge gained through experience or passed down by veterans. It was a harsh education, where mistakes could have serious consequences. So, while these supplementary foods offered a welcome change and a nutritional boost, they were always an opportunistic and somewhat risky venture, a testament to the soldier's unwavering drive to survive and thrive in challenging circumstances. The Roman soldier's diet was a constant negotiation with the environment, a perpetual search for calories and sustenance, whether from official rations or from the wild bounty around them. And in that relentless pursuit, they demonstrated an impressive adaptability and resilience that helped forge an empire. Let's turn our attention to the unsung heroes of your Roman marching diet: legumes and pulses. While meat and grain were the staples, humble beans and lentils played a crucial, often overlooked, role in providing protein, fiber, and essential nutrients. These were dried goods, easily transportable and remarkably durable, making them ideal for long campaigns. Think of large sacks of dried lentils or chickpeas being unloaded from a supply wagon, destined for your mess pot. They were not glamorous, but they were incredibly functional. Imagine a thick, hearty stew made with lentils, perhaps flavored with a bit of pork fat and whatever wild herbs you could find. It would be a comforting, filling meal, a vital source of energy that would sustain you through long marches and cold nights. Legumes provided a valuable plant-based protein source, which was particularly important given the irregular availability of fresh meat. They also offered a significant amount of dietary fiber, crucial for digestive health, especially when your diet was otherwise so restricted and often low in fresh produce. Historians still argue about the specific types of legumes most commonly used by the Roman army, with debates ranging from broad beans to chickpeas and various lentil varieties, likely depending on regional availability. The preparation of legumes required foresight and effort. They needed to be soaked for hours, sometimes overnight, before they could be cooked. This meant that they were typically prepared as part of the evening meal, when you had the time and resources to establish a fire and communal cooking. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of seeing a pot of beans slowly simmering over the fire, the aroma of a truly warm, cooked meal filling the air after a day of marching on hardtack. This slow cooking made them tender and more digestible, allowing your body to extract maximum nutrition. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman sources suggest that soldiers would sometimes carry small bags of dried beans in their personal packs, to be chewed raw as a quick energy boost during particularly strenuous parts of a march. Though this would have been quite tough on the teeth, this highlights the desperation for immediate sustenance. Another vital, though perhaps less appealing, source of calories and some protein was gruel. This was essentially a thin porridge made from your ground wheat flour and water, often fortified with pork fat. It was a quick, easy-to-prepare meal, especially for hurried breakfasts or when fuel was scarce. Imagine a bowl of warm, bland, but incredibly nourishing gruel, quickly consumed before the legion moved out. It might not have been a gourmet experience, but it was effective. Gruel was the ultimate efficiency meal, designed to get calories into your system with minimal fuss. It was a ubiquitous part of the Roman soldier's diet, a testament to its practicality and low cost. One mainstream historical fact is that gruel, in various forms, was a common staple food across many ancient cultures and armies due to its simplicity, cost-effectiveness, and ability to provide basic sustenance. The reliance on such basic, unprocessed foods meant that your Roman soldier's diet was inherently very low in sugar and refined carbohydrates. You would not be experiencing sugar rushes or crashes. Your energy would be sustained, slow burning, derived from complex carbohydrates and fats. This would contribute to your physical endurance and stable energy levels throughout the day. It also meant your dental health, while perhaps not perfect by modern standards, might have been better than those consuming sugary diets, though the tough, gritty nature of some of your food could also cause wear. The communal nature of preparing and sharing these meals, especially the stews and gruels, fostered a strong sense of camaraderie within your contubernium. You ate together, you shared the labor of cooking, and you faced the hardships of the march as a unit. This shared experience, even over a simple meal, built strong bonds that were essential for unit cohesion and morale. It was a time to talk, to grumble, to share stories, and to simply exist together outside the rigid hierarchy of command. The simple act of breaking bread, or rather, sharing a bowl of gruel, transformed a functional necessity into a moment of human connection. So, while your Roman soldier's diet might seem monotonous and unappetizing to modern eyes, it was a carefully calibrated system of essential nutrients, logistical efficiency, and a powerful tool for building the resilience and camaraderie that defined the Roman legions. It was a diet that fueled an empire, one lentil at a time. Let's consider the less glamorous, but equally vital aspects of a Roman soldier's diet on the march. The role of fermented foods and beverages, beyond just posca. While not always a prominent part of the daily ration, fermented products played an important role in both preservation and nutrient absorption. Think of cheese, for example. While fresh cheese was a luxury, harder, more aged cheeses were produced and consumed throughout the Roman world. These could be transported and stored for longer periods, providing a valuable source of fat, protein, and calcium. Imagine a hard, salty block of cheese, perhaps consumed in small portions with your hardtack, adding flavor and a much-needed nutritional boost. It was a dense source of calories, and its fermented nature also aided in its preservation. Historians still argue whether cheese was a regular part of the Roman military ration, or if it was more commonly acquired through local purchase or confiscation. Its availability likely varied considerably based on the region and the campaign. Beyond cheese, there's the possibility of other fermented plant products, particularly in certain regions. While direct evidence for widespread consumption by soldiers on the march is scarce, Roman civilian diets often included fermented vegetables, similar to pickles or sauerkraut. If soldiers encountered these in local communities, they might have been acquired opportunistically. These fermented vegetables would have offered vital vitamins, particularly vitamin C, which was crucial for preventing scurvy on long campaigns where fresh produce was scarce. Imagine the tangy bite of pickled cabbage, a welcome change from the blandness, and a source of essential nutrients. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman legionaries, particularly those with experience in the Germanic provinces, might have adopted local fermented vegetable practices, integrating them into their personal diet when possible, reflecting the cultural exchange that often occurred along the frontiers. The fermentation process itself was understood, even if the microbial science behind it was not. It was known that fermentation extended shelf life and often improved digestibility. This knowledge was applied to various foodstuffs, allowing for the creation of provisions that could withstand the rigors of military campaigning. One mainstream historical fact is that ancient societies relied heavily on fermentation as a primary method of food preservation before the advent of refrigeration, allowing them to store food for long periods and transport it over vast distances. The ever-present posca, with its sour wine or vinegar component, is perhaps the most obvious example of a fermented beverage in your daily life. But what about other forms of alcohol? While pure wine was controlled, small quantities of beer, particularly in the northern provinces like Gaul or Britannia, might have been encountered or even brewed by soldiers themselves if they were stationed in a long-term encampment. Beer offered calories and some hydration, though its alcoholic content would likely be kept low to maintain discipline. Imagine a rustic, unfiltered beer, perhaps a local brew, a small luxury to be enjoyed in the evenings after a long day. However, this would be an occasional treat, not a daily ration, as the Roman military largely preferred wine or posca for their general consumption. The focus on readily available, durable, and calorically dense foods meant that your Roman soldier's diet was remarkably efficient for its purpose. Every item, from the wheat to the fat to the occasional fermented good, served a clear function to sustain you, the soldier, through the immense physical demands of imperial expansion. There was little room for culinary experimentation or gastronomic pleasure. It was a diet of necessity, honed by centuries of military experience, and in its simplicity, it was profoundly effective. You learned to appreciate the subtle differences in texture and flavor, the tiny variations that broke the monotony. The sourness of posca, the chewiness of hardtack, the saltiness of cured meat, these were the familiar tastes of your survival. You understood that these were the building blocks of empire, the fuel that allowed Rome to project its power across the known world. And in that understanding, you found a strange kind of satisfaction, knowing that your humble meal was part of something truly colossal. Your very existence, fueled by these basic provisions, was a testament to the might of Rome. Let's delve into the environmental impact on a Roman soldier's diet, and the fascinating ways your provisions adapted to the specific regions where you campaigned. The Roman Empire spanned an enormous geographical area, from the deserts of North Africa to the damp, forested lands of Britannia. It was impossible to have a single, rigid dietary plan that worked perfectly everywhere. Instead, the Roman logistical machine, and indeed the soldiers themselves, exhibited remarkable flexibility. Imagine being transferred from a campaign in the fertile plains of Gaul, where you might have occasional access to fresh produce and even some local wine, to the harsh, barren landscapes of the Near East. Your diet would, out of necessity, shift. In grain-rich areas like Egypt, the primary staple of wheat would be abundant, and perhaps even of better quality. But in less agriculturally productive regions, say mountainous terrain or densely forested areas, obtaining grain would become a much greater challenge. This might necessitate a greater reliance on preserved foods brought in from elsewhere, or a more intense focus on foraging or hunting, if such activities were viable. Historians still argue about the precise degree to which Roman armies adapted their standard rations to local availability versus the consistent reliance on imported staples. The truth likely lies in a complex interplay of both. Animal protein sources would also vary greatly. In regions abundant with sheep or goats, you might occasionally get lamb or goat meat. In areas known for pigs, pork would be more prevalent. Imagine the subtle differences in the taste and texture of your cured meat, depending on the animal from which it came and the local curing methods. The Roman legions were not picky. They would consume whatever animal protein was available and could be preserved. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that in some northern provinces, like Germania, Roman soldiers occasionally consumed smoked fish or even wild game like elk or bear, adopting local culinary practices to supplement their diet when standard rations were scarce or unavailable. This willingness to embrace local food traditions highlights their adaptability. Water sources, as we've discussed, were a constant environmental concern. In arid regions, securing water became an even more critical, almost desperate task, often dictating marching routes and camp locations. Conversely, in damp, marshy areas, the challenge shifted to ensuring water purity and preventing waterborne diseases. The engineers and water bearers of your legion would be constantly assessing the local environment, making life or death decisions based on geographical realities. One mainstream historical fact is that Roman military engineers were renowned for their ability to construct temporary infrastructure, including wells, aqueducts, and even rudimentary filtration systems to secure water supplies in challenging environments. Even the type of wood available for cooking fires would vary. In forested regions, firewood would be abundant, making it easier to cook hot meals. In open plains or deserts, finding fuel would be a constant chore, potentially forcing you to rely more on cold rations or scavenged animal dung for fuel. Imagine the frustration of trying to start a fire with damp wood after a long day of marching in the rain, or the desperate search for fuel in a barren landscape. This environmental variable directly impacted the comfort and warmth of your meals. The climate also played a significant role. In hot climates, the risk of food spoilage increased, necessitating even more rigorous preservation techniques and faster consumption of perishable items. In cold climates, the caloric demands were even higher, and the need for warming hot meals became more acute. Imagine battling through a bitter winter campaign, every calorie precious, every warm mouthful a blessing. Your body would instinctively crave higher fat and carbohydrate content to maintain core temperature. This adaptation to climate, both in terms of food choice and preparation, was a tacit understanding within the Roman military. So, while the core of your diet, wheat, posca, and preserved fats, remained relatively constant, the nuances of your daily meals were constantly shaped by the landscape you traversed. You became a connoisseur of regional variations, an expert in making do with what the land provided. This environmental flexibility, this ability to feed an army across diverse ecosystems, was a quiet but profound strength of the Roman military, allowing them to conquer and hold vast territories. Your stomach was a testament to the Roman Empire's ability to adapt and overcome, constantly recalibrating its culinary strategies to the realities of the physical world. It was a relentless lesson in resourceful eating, dictated by the very ground beneath your marching feet. Let's explore the psychological impact of a Roman soldier's diet, beyond just the physical sustenance. Imagine the mental fortitude required to endure such monotony, the sheer willpower to keep going when every meal is essentially the same, day after day, month after month. Your diet was a constant, tangible reminder of the harsh realities of military life, stripped of all civilian comforts. There were no emotional eating binges, no comfort foods in the modern sense. Food was fuel, and its primary purpose was survival. This enforced simplicity could be psychologically draining, leading to a dullness of the senses, a muted appreciation for flavor. But it also forged a remarkable resilience. You learned to find satisfaction in the basic act of satiating hunger, in the warmth of a hot meal, however plain. This very basic level of gratification became deeply significant. Historians still argue whether the Roman army understood the psychological implications of diet on morale, or if their provisioning was purely logistical. It's likely a bit of both, They understood the importance of a well-fed army, and perhaps intuitively grasped the morale boost of even small dietary improvements. The anticipation of a meal, however simple, became a powerful psychological driver at the end of a long, exhausting day. The knowledge that a warm, if bland, gruel awaited you at camp could push you through those last few miles when your body screamed for rest. It was a small but significant reward, a tangible end to the day's suffering. Imagine the sensory experience: the smell of wood smoke, the murmur of conversation from your contubernium, the clatter of bowls, all signaling the coming respite. These moments, however fleeting, were crucial for mental well-being. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman soldiers, particularly those from more artistic or contemplative backgrounds, might have composed short poems or songs about their longing for fresh food or the simple pleasures of a good meal, using their experiences to express their inner thoughts and cope with the monotony. The shared act of eating, particularly the communal cooking and consumption of the evening meal, was also profoundly important for unit cohesion. It fostered a sense of shared hardship, a bond forged over bland food and a simple fire. You were literally breaking bread with your comrades, sharing the most basic act of survival. This camaraderie, cemented over countless shared meals, was vital for battlefield effectiveness. You fought for the man next to you, and that bond was strengthened around the cooking pot. One mainstream historical fact is that the Roman military placed a strong emphasis on unit cohesion and discipline, and communal activities, including eating, played a role in reinforcing these values. The occasional unexpected treat, like a wild berry picked along the road or a small fish caught in a stream, would have had an outsized psychological impact. It was a brief burst of novelty, a momentary escape from the routine, a reminder that the world contained more than just wheat and preserved fat. These fleeting indulgences would have been savored, their memory perhaps lingering longer than their actual taste. Imagine the whispered excitement as someone found a small patch of edible mushrooms, or the quiet sharing of a handful of nuts. These were small victories against the overwhelming sameness. The discipline required to consume a prescribed diet, even when it was unappealing, also contributed to the soldier's mental toughness. You learned to suppress cravings, to eat what was necessary, not what was desired. This self-control, exercised daily, extended beyond the mess kit to every aspect of military life. It honed your willpower and reinforced the idea that personal preferences were secondary to the needs of the legion. There was no room for pickiness. Hunger was a powerful motivator, and it taught you to appreciate every calorie. Ultimately, the Roman soldier's diet was a psychological crucible. It stripped away culinary expectations, forced an appreciation for the most basic sustenance, and forged an inner resilience. It was a diet that constantly reminded you of your primal needs and your place within a larger, more powerful machine. And in that relentless simplification, it helped to create soldiers of unparalleled discipline and endurance, men who could endure immense hardship and conquer vast empires, one tough, unglamorous meal at a time. The psychology of their stomachs was perhaps as important as the strength of their swords in forging the Roman Empire. Let's discuss the occasional presence of exotic foodstuffs in a Roman soldier's diet, not as regular rations, but as rare occurrences, typically a result of trade, plunder, or campaigning in far-flung lands. Imagine being a soldier stationed in a distant province like Egypt, where the staple grain might be different, or encountering local fruits that were completely alien to your Italian palate. While your core rations remained consistent: wheat, posca, and preserved meats, the fringes of your diet could pick up fascinating regional variations. For instance, in regions famous for dates, you might occasionally get a handful of dried dates, a sweet and calorie-dense treat that would be a welcome change from your usual fare. Imagine the concentrated sweetness, a burst of natural sugar that would be incredibly invigorating after a long march. This would be a significant luxury, a brief glimpse into the culinary landscape of the conquered. Historians still argue whether such exotic foodstuffs were sometimes officially requisitioned and distributed to troops, or if they were almost exclusively acquired through individual means or the informal camp economy. Spices, though incredibly valuable and primarily reserved for the wealthy, might occasionally find their way into a soldier's meal through trade or plunder, adding a rare burst of flavor to an otherwise bland diet. Imagine a hint of cumin or coriander, brought back from a campaign in the east, subtly altering the taste of your gruel. It would be a fleeting moment of culinary sophistication in a world of simplicity. These were not flavor enhancers for daily use, but rather precious commodities that, when available, would be savored. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman military expeditions to distant lands would occasionally bring back unusual flora and fauna, including new types of fruits or vegetables, which would then be introduced to Roman cuisine, demonstrating the indirect culinary impact of military expansion. This highlights the slow but steady influence of conquered lands on the Roman palate. Another fascinating, albeit less common, aspect of diet was the consumption of fish sauce, or garum. This pungent, fermented fish sauce was a ubiquitous condiment in the Roman world, used by rich and poor alike. While not a standalone food item, it could be used to flavor your gruel or other dishes, adding a salty, umami kick. Think of it as the ancient world's all-purpose seasoning, capable of transforming a bland meal into something more palatable. While you might not be carrying a large supply of garum on a forced march, in a more settled camp or garrison, it would likely be available, either officially or through civilian vendors. Imagine a few drops of this intensely flavorful liquid transforming your simple wheat porridge into something genuinely savory. One mainstream historical fact is that garum was a highly prized commodity in the Roman Empire, produced on an industrial scale, and traded extensively across the Mediterranean, showcasing the Roman appreciation for fermented flavors. These occasional exotic additions highlight the vastness of the Roman Empire and the diversity of its conquered territories. Your diet, while fundamentally Roman, was also a subtle reflection of where you were campaigning. It was a constant negotiation between the standardized rations and the opportunistic acquisition of local delights. These brief encounters with new flavors would have broadened your culinary horizons, even if only in the rarest of moments. They were a reminder that beyond the familiar tastes of your home province, there was a whole world of different foods, waiting to be discovered or conquered. The presence of these exotic foods, however rare, also speaks to the adaptability of the Roman soldier. You were not rigid in your dietary habits. You consumed what was available and what could sustain you. This pragmatism was a key to your survival and the success of the legions. You learned to appreciate the unfamiliar, to make do with what the conquered lands provided, even if it meant stepping outside your culinary comfort zone. And in these small culinary adventures, however fleeting, you gained a deeper understanding of the vastness and diversity of the empire you were helping to build. The Roman soldier's stomach, in its own way, was a testament to the empire's reach and its astonishing ability to absorb and integrate the resources of its conquered lands. It was a diet of necessity, seasoned by the occasional taste of distant shores. Let's delve into the strict rationing and disciplinary measures surrounding food in the Roman army, a testament to their unwavering focus on order and control. Your diet was not a matter of personal choice, it was a carefully managed resource, distributed according to strict military regulations. Imagine the methodical distribution of your daily wheat ration, weighed and measured, ensuring fairness and preventing waste. This rigorous system was designed to prevent hoarding, favoritism, and ultimately, to ensure that every soldier, from the lowest recruit to the most seasoned veteran, received their due. It was a constant balancing act between supply and demand, overseen by quartermasters and logistics officers, who understood that a well-fed army was a disciplined army. Historians still argue about the precise methods of ration distribution in the field. Was it a daily issue, or were rations sometimes given out for several days at a time, forcing soldiers to manage their own provisions? The practicalities likely varied, but the principle of strict control remained. The punishment for food-related offenses could be severe. Theft of rations, hoarding, or unauthorized foraging could lead to flogging, reduction in pay, or even more serious disciplinary actions. This was not about petty crime. It was about undermining the logistical backbone of the legion, jeopardizing the survival of the entire force. Discipline was paramount, and every aspect of military life, including food, was subject to it. Imagine the fear of being caught stealing a handful of grain, knowing the harsh consequences that awaited you. This strict enforcement ensured that the limited resources were managed efficiently and equitably. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman military commanders would occasionally conduct surprise inspections of soldiers' packs to ensure they were not hoarding rations or carrying unauthorized, perishable food items that could spoil and attract vermin. This demonstrates their meticulous attention to detail regarding hygiene and order. The Roman army also had a system for dealing with food spoilage or contamination. While not always successful, efforts were made to ensure the quality of provisions. Spoiled food could lead to widespread illness, which could decimate a legion faster than any enemy. Quartermasters would inspect incoming supplies, and soldiers themselves would be expected to report any issues. The sour wine in Posca, as we've discussed, was a rudimentary but effective way to purify water and mask the taste of less than ideal sources, a pragmatic solution to a constant problem. One mainstream historical fact is that disease, often linked to poor sanitation and contaminated food or water, was a major cause of casualties in ancient armies, frequently surpassing battle losses. The Romans, with their emphasis on hygiene and disciplined provisioning, often fared better than their adversaries in this regard. The military diet also reflected the hierarchy within the Roman army. While the basic staples were universal, officers and higher-ranking personnel would often receive more varied and sometimes higher quality rations. They might have access to fresh meat more regularly, or finer cuts, and certainly more opportunities for wine and other luxuries. Imagine the subtle envy as you saw an officer enjoying a more substantial meal, a stark reminder of the differences in rank. This was not seen as unfair, it was simply the accepted order of things. Their responsibilities were greater, and their physical and mental well-being was considered paramount for effective leadership. Even the act of eating itself was likely subject to a certain degree of military decorum, especially in formal settings or during official meals. While your contubernium might eat informally around a campfire, larger gatherings or officers' messes would adhere to established norms. This extended discipline to even the most basic human activity, reinforcing the pervasive military structure. Your diet, therefore, was not just about caloric intake, it was a deeply ingrained part of your identity as a Roman soldier, shaped by strict regulations, logistical realities, and the overarching demands of military discipline. It was a constant lesson in self-control, resourcefulness, and the unwavering pursuit of order, even in the most fundamental aspects of your daily life. And in that rigid framework, you found the sustenance, both physical and mental, to endure the relentless march of empire. Let's now consider the less frequent but significant periods of feasting and celebration in a Roman soldier's life, stark contrasts to the everyday monotony of marching rations. While the default was austerity, the Roman army understood the importance of morale, and occasional feasts served as powerful motivators and opportunities for bonding. Imagine the sheer anticipation and joy when news of a celebratory meal was announced. This would typically occur after a significant military victory, during religious festivals, or perhaps upon the ascension of a new emperor. These feasts were a rare opportunity for soldiers to enjoy a more varied and abundant diet. Fresh meat, perhaps even a whole roasted animal like a pig or a bull, would be the centerpiece. The aroma alone would be intoxicating after weeks of cured fare. Imagine the crackling skin, the succulent meat, a feast for the senses that would be savored with every bite. Historians still argue about the frequency and scale of these military feasts. While documented, they were likely still relatively rare events given the logistical challenges. Wine, in its undiluted form, would flow more freely on these occasions. This was a chance to enjoy wine as a beverage, not just as a water purifier. Imagine the celebratory toasts, the clinking of cups, the loosening of tongues as the wine took effect. It would be a moment of genuine merriment and camaraderie, a brief respite from the rigid discipline of military life. Fresh bread, perhaps baked with finer flour and even leavened, would be available, a luxurious departure from the tough hardtack. Vegetables and fruits, if locally available, would also be more plentiful, adding color, flavor, and much-needed vitamins to the feast. Think of vibrant salads, fresh berries, or sweet figs, a true sensory overload after the blandness of your usual diet. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman military commanders, particularly those with a flair for theatricality, would occasionally arrange elaborate feasts with entertainers and musicians to further boost morale and celebrate significant achievements, transforming the military camp into a temporary festival ground. These feasts were not just about eating, they were highly symbolic. They reinforced the idea of shared success, of collective achievement, and the generosity of the commanders and the empire. They were a powerful tool for building unit cohesion and loyalty, reminding you that your sacrifices were recognized and rewarded. Imagine the feeling of being part of something larger, celebrated and acknowledged for your contribution to Rome's glory. One mainstream historical fact is that triumphs, elaborate parades and celebrations held in Rome for victorious generals often included massive public feasts, and military victories were frequently marked by feasting among the troops as well. The contrast between these celebratory meals and your everyday rations made them even more impactful. The hardship of the daily march made the occasional feast a truly memorable event, burned into your memory as a rare moment of abundance and joy. You would carry the memory of these feasts with you, a mental fuel to draw upon during the next grueling campaign. They were a reminder that there was something beyond the constant grind, a taste of the rewards that military service could occasionally bring. However, it's important to remember these feasts were exceptions, not the rule. The vast majority of your time was spent enduring the monotonous, functional diet. The feasts were a carefully managed indulgence, designed to maintain morale without undermining discipline or creating unrealistic expectations. They were strategically deployed moments of relief, preventing burnout and reinforcing the soldiers' commitment to the Legion. So, while you might dream of the next grand celebration, your reality was firmly rooted in the simple, unglamorous sustenance of wheat, posca, and cured meat. But the memory of that roasted pig, the taste of undiluted wine, those fleeting moments of abundance, would certainly make the hardtack just a little bit more bearable. These celebrations were not just for your stomach, but for your soul. Let's delve into the vital role of grains beyond just wheat in the Roman soldiers' diet, and how their presence varied depending on agricultural regions and the logistical capabilities of the army. While wheat was undoubtedly the king, other grains like barley and spelt also played a significant, if sometimes secondary, role. Imagine your daily ration bag containing a mix of grains, reflecting the local harvest or the strategic choices of the quartermaster. Barley, for instance, was often considered a more basic or less refined grain, sometimes even associated with animal feed or punitive rations for disgraced soldiers. However, it was hardy, grew well in diverse climates, and provided significant sustenance. If wheat supplies were low, or if campaigning in a region where barley was more abundant, it would certainly form a part of your diet. It could be consumed as a porridge, similar to gruel, or baked into a coarser, denser bread than wheat. Historians still argue about the precise ratios of wheat to barley in the Roman military diet, with some suggesting a consistent preference for wheat, while others posit more opportunistic usage of barley based on availability. Spelt, an ancient relative of wheat, was another common grain, particularly in certain parts of Italy and Gaul. It was known for its nutritional value and its ability to grow in less fertile soils. Spelt could be milled and used similarly to wheat, offering a robust and nourishing base for your bread or gruel. Imagine the subtle differences in texture and flavor between a spelt hardtack and a wheat hardtack, variations that would be quite noticeable to your discerning, if limited, palate. These different grains provided alternative sources of complex carbohydrates, ensuring that the Roman army always had a reliable energy supply, even if the primary grain was temporarily unavailable or compromised. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Roman soldiers sometimes used small amounts of barley or other grains to brew rudimentary, low-alcohol beers in their temporary camps, especially in provinces where beer was a local custom, though this would have been an unofficial, opportunistic activity. The grinding of these various grains often fell to the soldiers themselves, particularly for the daily rations. Imagine the rhythmic sound of quern stones turning, transforming hard kernels into coarse flour, a communal task shared by your contubernium. This labor was a constant reminder of the direct connection between effort and sustenance. There were no prepackaged meals, your food required physical preparation, fostering a deeper appreciation for every mouthful. One mainstream historical fact is that hand mills, or querns, were an essential piece of equipment for Roman legions on campaign, allowing soldiers to process their grain rations into flour for immediate consumption. The availability of different grains also highlights the incredible adaptability of the Roman logistical system. They were not dependent on a single agricultural product, allowing them to draw resources from across their vast empire. This diversification of food sources was a strategic advantage, reducing vulnerability to crop failures or localized shortages. You, as a soldier, benefited from this flexibility, ensuring that even if one grain source was compromised, another would be brought in to fill the gap. It was a testament to the comprehensive planning that underpinned Roman military success. The constant consumption of coarse, sometimes gritty, grains would undoubtedly have taken a toll on your teeth over time. Imagine the wear and tear, the occasional chipped tooth from biting down, on a particularly hard piece of unleavened bread or a stray piece of grit from the milling process. Dental care in the Roman world was rudimentary at best, so you would likely suffer from various dental issues throughout your career. This was a common hardship shared by all Roman soldiers, a minor discomfort compared to the dangers of battle, but a persistent reminder of the physical demands of your diet. So, while wheat was the undisputed staple, the subtle variations in grain, the efforts of milling, and the unavoidable wear and tear on your teeth all contributed to the multifaceted reality of your Roman soldiers' diet on the march. It was a diet of robust functionality, built on the sturdy foundation of diverse grains, ensuring that the Roman military machine, though not always aesthetically pleasing, was always well-oiled and relentlessly grinding forward. Let's explore the strategic use of starvation and denial of resources as a weapon by the Roman army, and conversely, how your own diet was designed to withstand such tactics. The Romans were masters of siege warfare, and one of their most effective tools was to starve their enemies into submission. Imagine being on the other side, trapped within walls, watching your food supplies dwindle, knowing that the disciplined Roman legions outside were well fed and capable of enduring for months. This psychological warfare, the slow, agonizing denial of sustenance, was often more effective than direct assault. The Romans would blockade cities, cut off supply lines, and systematically destroy crops and infrastructure in enemy territory to prevent them from feeding themselves. This was a brutal but highly effective strategy, often forcing surrender without a single sword drawn. Historians still argue about the ethical implications of starvation tactics in ancient warfare, weighing military necessity against human suffering. Conversely, your Roman soldier's diet was specifically designed to resist such tactics when you were the one under siege, or operating in hostile territory where supply lines might be cut. The emphasis on durable, non-perishable foods like unground wheat, cured meats, and dried legumes meant that you could carry several days, if not weeks, of rations on your person, or within a fortified camp. This self-sufficiency allowed the Roman army to operate independently for extended periods, making them incredibly resilient to enemy attempts at disruption. Imagine being cut off from supply, but knowing your heavy pack contained enough calories to keep you going for a significant time, a stark contrast to a less well-provisioned enemy. This logistical foresight was a cornerstone of Roman military doctrine. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that during extended sieges, Roman soldiers were sometimes known to supplement their diet with unusual sources like rats, or even the leather from their shields, a grim testament to their desperation and resilience when supplies truly ran out. The Roman army's ability to construct fortified camps every night, even on the march, was also crucial to protecting their food supplies. These temporary camps provided security for the soldiers and their provisions, making it difficult for enemy forces to launch surprise raids on supply dumps or individual soldiers' rations. Imagine the constant vigilance, the defensive perimeter, all designed to safeguard the very sustenance that kept the legion alive. One mainstream historical fact is that the construction of a fortified marching camp, or castra estiva, at the end of each day's march was a standard and disciplined practice of the Roman legion, crucial for security and logistical management. The resilience built into your diet also allowed for prolonged campaigns far from home. You were not tied to a quick return to base for resupply. Your ability to live off minimal, pre-prepared rations meant that Rome could project its power deep into enemy territory, sustaining forces for months or even years without significant logistical breakdown. This strategic endurance, fueled by your robust but humble diet, was a key factor in the expansion and maintenance of the Roman Empire. You were a walking, fighting, eating testament to sustained imperial ambition. The psychological warfare aspect also extended to the sight of a well-fed Roman army, an enemy observing the disciplined, seemingly unending columns of Roman soldiers, each carrying their provisions, would understand the formidable logistical power behind them. It was a visible sign of Rome's unwavering strength, and its ability to sustain prolonged conflict, often leading to a demoralizing effect on the opposition. Your full belly, however unglamorously filled, was a subtle message of power to your adversaries. So, while you might endure a diet of constant monotony, you were also a part of a sophisticated military machine that used food, or the lack thereof, as a powerful strategic tool. Your daily sustenance was not just about keeping you alive, it was about ensuring Rome's dominance, a quiet but profound weapon in the arsenal of empire. And in that, there was a certain grim satisfaction. Let's examine the role of fermentation in the Roman soldiers' diet more broadly, understanding it not just as a choice, but as a crucial method of preservation and nutrient enhancement in an era without refrigeration. Beyond Posca, fermented products were a silent, everyday hero of your survival. Think of the widespread consumption of fermented fish products, garum, which we briefly touched upon. While the strong smell might be off-putting to modern noses, this intensely flavorful sauce was a staple, not just a condiment. It added a powerful umami and salty kick to your otherwise bland meals, making gruel or hardtack far more palatable. Imagine a few drops of this liquid essence transforming the taste of your simple porridge. It was packed with nutrients, including amino acids, and its high salt content also helped with electrolyte replenishment, crucial after a long march. Historians still argue about the specific varieties of fish used for garum production, with some suggesting regional preferences for smaller, oily fish, while others point to larger fish offal as common ingredients. Fermented dairy products, particularly hard cheeses, were also a significant part of the Roman diet and would have been present in a soldier's provisions whenever possible. These were far more durable than fresh milk or soft cheeses, capable of being transported for long distances without spoiling. They provided dense calories, protein, and essential fats, a compact and nourishing food source. Imagine gnawing on a piece of aged, salty cheese, a welcome addition to your hardtack. The fermentation process made them easier to digest for many and extended their shelf life remarkably. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman recipes for hard cheeses involved pressing them for weeks under immense weights and then rubbing them with salt or brine. Techniques remarkably similar to modern cheese-making methods, highlighting the ancient world's sophisticated understanding of food preservation. The process of fermenting grain, beyond just brewing sour wine for Posca, also played a role. While true bread leavening with yeast was known, some of your more rustic, unleavened bread, or panis militaris, might have undergone a slight natural fermentation from wild yeasts, giving it a subtle sourness and perhaps improving its digestibility. This natural process, often unintentional, contributed to the character and longevity of your staple food. One mainstream historical fact is that spontaneous fermentation, driven by naturally occurring microbes, was a fundamental part of food preparation across many ancient cultures, long before the scientific understanding of microbiology. The lack of understanding of germ theory meant that fermentation was appreciated for its practical effects, preservation and altered flavor, rather than its scientific basis. But its practical benefits were immense. It allowed Roman armies to transport and store food for months, even years, ensuring that despite the rigors of campaigning, there was always a reliable source of sustenance. Without these methods, widespread spoilage and starvation would have been far more rampant. Your ability to function as a Roman soldier was intrinsically linked to these ancient technologies of food preservation. So, while your diet might have seemed repetitive, it was also a testament to the ingenuity of ancient food science. The humble Roman soldier, often unknowingly, benefited from centuries of accumulated knowledge about how to make food last, how to extract nutrients from basic ingredients, and how to create flavors that, while not always delicate, were certainly impactful. The tang of Posca, the pungency of garum, the saltiness of aged cheese, these were the tastes of an empire sustained by fermentation, a subtle but powerful force in your daily quest for survival. Your stomach, in its own way, was a laboratory of ancient food preservation, allowing you to march, fight, and conquer, one fermented mouthful at a time. This quiet revolution in food technology was truly an unsung hero of Roman military might. Let's zoom in on the specific types of preserved meats available to the Roman soldier, as fresh meat was a rare luxury on the march. Your protein sources relied heavily on ingenious ancient preservation techniques, primarily salting and smoking. Imagine opening a barrel or a leather pouch to reveal heavily salted pork or beef, perhaps even a whole cured ham. This was not the thinly sliced, delicate prosciutto you might find today. This was robust, dense meat, designed for longevity and caloric punch. The salt content would be incredibly high, not just for flavor, but as a powerful antimicrobial agent, drawing out moisture and inhibiting bacterial growth. This extreme saltiness would make you constantly thirsty, reinforcing the critical role of Posca in your hydration. Historians still argue about the specific cuts of meat typically preserved for military rations, with some suggesting fattier cuts were preferred for their higher caloric density, while others argue for leaner, easier to dry options. Smoking was another prevalent method, often used in conjunction with salting. Imagine the rich, earthy aroma of smoked bacon or dried beef, a scent that would be more appealing than the raw, salted variety. The smoke acted as a preservative, coating the meat with compounds that inhibited spoilage and also imparted a distinct, savory flavor. These smoked meats would be tough and chewy, requiring significant effort to consume, but they delivered vital protein and fat, essential for muscle repair and sustained energy. You might gnaw on a piece of dried beef like jerky, slowly extracting its nutrients. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman military camps had dedicated smokehouses or drying racks, particularly in regions with abundant timber, where freshly acquired meat could be quickly processed for longer-term storage and future rations. Beyond large cuts of meat, sausages were also a common form of preserved protein. These would be made from ground meat, often mixed with herbs, spices, and sometimes even grain, and then stuffed into casings before being cured or smoked. Sausages were a practical way to utilize all parts of an animal and provided a versatile, portable food source. Imagine a dense, flavorful sausage, perhaps eaten cold or briefly warmed over a fire, a welcome change from plain cured meat. The variety of sausages would depend on the region and available ingredients, offering subtle flavor variations within your monotonous diet. One mainstream historical fact is that sausages were a popular and ancient food form in the Roman world, with many different regional variations and recipes, showcasing their ingenuity in utilizing and preserving meat. The process of preparing these preserved meats was labor-intensive and often took place in large, centralized military depots or through civilian contractors who specialized in supplying the army. This large-scale production ensured a consistent, if basic, supply of protein for the legions. The logistics involved in curing thousands of pounds of meat and transporting it across the empire were immense, a testament to Roman organizational prowess. You as a soldier benefited from this system, even if you never saw the initial stages of the preservation process. The consistency and reliability of these preserved meats were paramount. You needed to know that when you opened your ration pouch, the meat inside would be edible and nourishing, not rancid or spoiled. This trust in the supply chain was critical for morale and effectiveness. While you might occasionally dream of a juicy, freshly roasted piece of meat, the reality was one of durable, functional, and often intensely salty preserved fare. But it was this humble, long-lasting protein that allowed the Roman army to march further, fight harder, and conquer more effectively than any other force of its time. Your very strength, your very ability to endure the relentless demands of empire, was built on the robust, and perhaps slightly chewy, foundation of preserved meat. Let's conclude our detailed exploration by focusing on the crucial role of personal ingenuity and adaptation in the Roman soldier's diet on the march. While the army provided a disciplined, systematic diet, your individual resourcefulness often filled the gaps, turning scarcity into survival. Imagine the small, personal tricks you might develop to make your food more palatable or to supplement your rations. Perhaps you learned to carefully toast your hardtack over a small flame, softening it slightly and bringing out a subtle, nutty flavor. Or maybe you had a particular way of mixing your gruel to make it just a little bit thicker or more satisfying. These minor innovations, born out of necessity, were a testament to the human spirit of adaptation. Historians still argue about the extent to which individual food preparation methods varied among soldiers, or if the army encouraged a strict uniformity to ensure consistency. It's likely a mix, with room for minor personal touches. Foraging, as we've touched on, was a prime example of this personal ingenuity. Learning to identify edible plants, berries, or roots along the march was a valuable skill passed down among veterans. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of finding a patch of wild onions or a few sweet berries, a momentary burst of freshness and flavor that would lift your spirits. This unofficial supplementation, though often overlooked in official records, was vital for adding variety and essential micronutrients to your monotonous diet. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Roman military units, particularly those stationed in remote or frontier areas, might have developed their own unique foraging lore or informal guides to local edible plants, reflecting the specific environmental knowledge acquired over generations of campaigning. Trading with local populations, or even with other soldiers, was another way to diversify your diet. If you had something valuable to offer, perhaps a piece of salvaged equipment, or a small coin, you might be able to acquire a bit of fresh cheese, a few eggs, or a local fruit. Imagine the quiet bartering, the subtle negotiations, all to improve your immediate culinary circumstances. These informal exchanges were a vital part of the camp economy, driven by the universal desire for better food. One mainstream historical fact is that despite strict military discipline, informal trade networks often flourished around Roman military camps, facilitating the exchange of goods and services between soldiers and local civilians. The ability to adapt your cooking methods to available resources was also key. If firewood was scarce, you learned to make do with smaller fires or to eat more of your rations cold. If water was limited, you became even more scrupulous with your posca. Your survival depended on your flexibility and your willingness to make do with what you had. There was no room for culinary fussness. Practicality always trumped preference. This constant adaptation honed your resourcefulness, making you a survivor in the harshest of environments. The sheer resilience of the Roman soldiers' digestive system should also be acknowledged. Years of consuming a coarse, often gritty, and repetitive diet would have forged an incredibly robust gut. You would be far less prone to the dietary sensitivities and digestive issues that plague many people in the modern world. Your stomach was a furnace, capable of processing whatever fuel was thrown into it, a testament to the body's remarkable ability to adapt to severe dietary constraints. This biological adaptation was as crucial to your success as any tactical maneuver. So, while the Roman military provided a foundation of rations, it was your personal ingenuity, your willingness to adapt, and your sheer physical and mental resilience that truly ensured your survival on the march. Every soldier became a micro-logistics expert, constantly assessing resources, seeking opportunities, and making the most of whatever was available. Your diet, in its stark simplicity, was a daily lesson in self-reliance, a constant reminder that even in the most organized military machine, individual resourcefulness was the ultimate key to enduring the relentless march of empire. And in that relentless pursuit of sustenance, you found the strength to conquer the world, one tough, resourceful bite at a time. Finally, let us reflect on the enduring legacy of the Roman soldier's diet, not just as a historical curiosity, but as a blueprint for military logistics and human resilience that echoed through centuries. Your simple, functional diet, centered on durable grains, preserved meats, and acidified water, proved to be incredibly effective in sustaining a massive fighting force across vast distances and diverse terrains. This fundamental approach to military provisioning laid the groundwork for armies for millennia, influencing dietary staples and logistical strategies long after the Roman Empire itself faded. Imagine how many subsequent armies, from medieval knights to Napoleonic soldiers, grappled with similar challenges of feeding their troops on the move, often drawing lessons, however indirectly, from the Roman model. Historians still argue about the direct lines of influence, but the principles of caloric density, preservation, and efficient transport, perfected by the Romans, remained universal truths of military supply. The Roman emphasis on discipline in food consumption, from strict rationing to the communal nature of eating, also left an indelible mark. It demonstrated that a shared, if monotonous, diet could foster unity and resilience within a fighting force. This understanding of food, not just as fuel, but as a tool for morale and cohesion, was a profound, if often unstated, aspect of Roman military success. Imagine the echoes of those shared meals, those quiet moments of camaraderie over a pot of gruel, shaping the very fabric of military life through the ages. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some modern military training exercises, particularly those focused on survival in austere environments, still draw parallels to the Roman soldier's diet, emphasizing resourcefulness and making do with minimal provisions. Your Roman soldier's diet was a powerful testament to human adaptability. It showed that the human body could not only survive but thrive on a limited, often unappetizing, range of foods, provided those foods offered the essential calories and nutrients. It was a diet that bred toughness, endurance, and an unwavering focus on the essentials. There were no fads, no culinary trends, just the raw, unadulterated necessity of survival. This fundamental resilience, forged in the crucible of military campaigning, was a defining characteristic of the Roman legionary. One mainstream historical fact is that the average life expectancy of a Roman soldier was often surprisingly high compared to the civilian population, partly due to regular, if basic, access to food and a disciplined, active lifestyle, despite the dangers of combat. The legacy also lies in the everyday items that became staples in Europe and beyond, often introduced or popularized through Roman military expansion. crops, farming techniques, and even basic preservation methods traveled with the legions, subtly influencing the diets of conquered peoples and future generations. The very concept of a logistical supply chain, meticulously planned and executed, was a Roman innovation that continues to be critical for modern armies and large-scale operations. So, while you, the Roman soldier, may have just been trying to fill your stomach, your simple meals were part of a much larger story, a testament to an empire's ingenuity and endurance. Now, as our journey with the Roman soldier winds down, let's allow the dust to settle from those ancient marches. The sounds of the legion, the rhythmic scuff of boots, the distant shouts of command, they begin to fade. The flickering campfires grow dim, their smoke curling softly into the night sky. Remember the hardtack, its plainness a stark reminder of survival, and the tartness of posca, quenching a thirst earned through miles of tireless effort. You, the soldier, are settling into a well-deserved rest, your body tired but sustained, your mind perhaps dreaming of something more, something fresh and sweet, a memory of a time before the endless roads. The lessons of their diet, of simple necessity and profound resilience, whisper to us from the quiet passage of history. It was a life of hardship, yes, but also a life of extraordinary human capability, fueled by the most basic provisions. As the last embers glow and then darken, let the echoes of their journey and their humble meals lull you into a peaceful slumber. Good night.